Hello, this is James Carvin. It is New Year's Day today, and yesterday I had a technical difficulty. I wasn't able to upload my video. I was on the road. I'm going to have to do it later. I was trying to get it onto Scripture Note. That's a page on Facebook that I administer, and I'm on my way back home, and once I get on my computer environment at home, I can maybe edit it and get it uploaded the right way along with this video, which is going to follow up on that one. And I'm going to also post this to my the Bible and Beyond channel on YouTube, and I should explain what these things are. And this video, it'll be about 30 minutes. That's a good length for a video, I think. I'll aim at. But I do want to explain and follow up on a few things that I mentioned in my New Year's resolution video. Covered several topics, not all of them very well. My ADHD was kicking in. Lack of sleep will do that to a person. But so let's start out with Pascal's wager, the double fire insurance argument. I didn't explain that very well. I was distracted. But Pascal's wager, the double fire insurance argument that my father gave me to convince me to become a Christian, and to become a Catholic Christian, and specifically. So let's start out with what Pascal's wager is. It says if you have all of these benefits and no costs, then that's probably a good, safe choice. And this is something called the utility formula that Pascal was taking this from. Businesses operate on these principles. So my father was very familiar with it. He was a businessman. And I'll tell you about that some other time, some other video. So Pascal's wager is the utility formula for Christians that says if you believe and you're correct, that's one class of things. If you believe and you're incorrect, that's another class of things. If you don't believe and you're correct, that's another class of things. And if you don't believe and you're incorrect, that's another class of things. So what are we talking about? If you believe and you are correct, then that would mean that you believe that you're going to heaven, and the benefit is heaven and all of its glory, and eye has not seen nor ear has heard how good that actually is. Okay, so my wife the other day was saying, I'm not sure I wouldn't get bored just singing in the choir in heaven and having an endless church service. And I tried to explain to her. I said, honey, the heavens open up to you, the entire multiverse. You've got endless glory to explore in heaven, and the idea of playing golf in heaven, that person's heaven is going to be playing golf forever and having a hole-in-one every time, right? Well, that wouldn't be very much fun. Where's the competition? I'm a springboard diver. My heaven would be I could just do an infinite number of flips and twists and then enter the water without a single molecule of splash, but with a very profound, nice rip sound coming in there with perfect form, right? So that's my idea of heaven. I can do that in heaven, right? All right, so I want to go in all there, but this is the eye has not seen and ear has not heard part of the benefit of if you believe and you're right, that's what you have to gain. And so the Christian is going to the non-Christian and saying, I believe and I'm right. And if you don't believe and you're wrong, or if I did not believe and I was wrong, then the assumption is the opposite. The cost of non-belief, that decision, is infinitely bad. There's the argument for hell, right? That's like, oh my goodness, you'll never get out of there. You'll be tortured forever in maximal torture. Whatever the worst conceivable stuff could be, that's maximum. That's the cost of not believing and being wrong. So that's what the Christian thinks, is I have everything to gain and every reason to believe in terms of incentives. Now, the atheist is going to say, if the atheist is right, then the atheist, how much better is their life than the Christian life? What's the benefit there? Because they're assuming there's only one life. And they're assuming something that in Christianity we call it annihilationism. That means that when you die, that's it. That's the end of it. You're no longer conscious. Nothing in the afterlife matters. So you might say, why not? Christians in particular are critical of atheists are likely to say, why don't you party and live selfishly and enjoy yourself, live a hedonistic life, because tomorrow you die, and gain all the pleasure and all the things that in this world that you can get, win some sort of game or whatever it is you want to do just to be happy and not worry about any afterlife. And you know what? There might actually be some benefit to that. I should cover it. What is the real benefit to living in a life that assumes there's no afterlife? Well, there's a lot of variety in that, to be realistic about it. I mean, a Buddhist, for instance, doesn't necessarily speculate about whether there is a God. Some do, some don't. But their goal is to maximize their awesomeness in this world while they're alive, out of its own sense of goodness. And some believe in reincarnation, others don't. But how about a person that is a philosopher? Their goal might be to find the value in life of leaving a legacy of philosophy for followers, and they might live a very virtuous life. There's some that argue, how much better is your virtue if what you do is done for the thing in itself, not because of some reward that you might receive afterwards. And and I think that's very valid. I find that it's actually heroic in a lot of ways for atheists to do good. It's not only is it what they do selfless, but it's really arguably just for the pure sake of doing good, if they choose to do good, when they didn't need to at all, because they're not going to be held accountable for anything ultimately, right? That's their thinking. So I don't think it's valid for Christians to say, how can you have a moral sense if you're an atheist? I mean, the Christian conveniently does have the Bible that they can turn to, or their tradition that says this is what's right and this is what's wrong. Here's your moral system. The atheist has to make up their moral system, and there's a variety of atheists' ways of thinking, and so that some actually do act in this very morally upright way, and others don't. Just like in Christianity, there's many who are far from morally upright. Let's face this. In fact, many do what Paul said don't do, which was to consider your liberty a free ticket for sin. Let's put it that way. It's it's not an occasion for sin. Your liberty in Christ. Okay, so God's forgiven you. God will forgive you. So does that mean that you have a free ticket for sin? And this is why Christians tend to not live lives that are much better than atheists' lives on the whole. Maybe they do. There are many different types of Christians and studies that have been done to show. Sorry, I had to drive while I'm doing this. I'm on my way home. So with all these facts, I'm not going to consider whether Christians are really more moral than atheists are. Okay, I'm just not going to go there today because that's going to involve an awful lot of data gathering and analysis that's beyond the scope of this. But my point is, going back to Pascal's wager here for the Christians, if the atheist is correct that there is no God, and then they have no hell to worry about, no heaven to lose. So their only benefit is whatever amount of moral or even amoral life that brings on their own happiness, or the happiness of this world if other people matter to an atheist. And I think that most atheists do care about other people. Well, let's be fair about that, don't you think? So there is some benefit, but it's not as measurable as the benefit of the fullness of glory, the maximization of awesomeness, and at the same time, the elimination of the maximization of awfulness, hell. And so most Christians believe in hell. Now, not all Christians believe in hell. That's it's assumed that they all do because that's such a popular way of teaching. But there's actually many Christians that don't believe in hell. They're annihilationists just like the atheists are. However, the annihilation only applies to non-believers. So you have everything on the benefit side, all of the glory of heaven. But if you happen to not believe, then you just never, it's as if you never existed. So now if the atheist is wrong on their side of things, then they do have the threat of heaven, but they don't believe that they are. And so, but the idea here is that it makes sense in terms of benefits and costs to become a Christian. That's Pascal's wager. Makes sense? Now, when my father gives me the double fire insurance in order you're getting out of hell, a lot of Christians, they're not looking at the glory side, the benefits side of this at all. They're just, they say salvation is salvation from hell. And I was like, that sounds like bad news, not good news. Okay. That doesn't sound like the Evangelion. And yet, I could argument it. The deconstructionists are going to tell me that the word evangelion actually was made up by Paul, and that a better translation than good news is actually announcement. Just, this is my gospel, Paul. You'll see that in a number of places. That's my gospel, and that the word gospel, evangelion in Greek, was sort of used by later writers to call everything the gospel. And Paul's gospel was specifically to preach to the Gentiles. No, you don't have to get circumcised. No, you don't have to follow these 616 laws, 636 laws of Moses and that are in the Old Testament. You can be free from all of that. That was what Paul was teaching the Gentiles. He felt like he had a revelation from God directly to give them this message. And so most deconstructionists would agree with me about that. All right, now I don't really have a problem with that. That doesn't destroy my view of the Bible if that's true. Then it seems to be a pretty good argument that actually is the case, that the word gospel started to become applied to the narrative stories that were written afterwards. As a believer, I don't have any problem understanding that the 4 Gospels were written after the letters of Paul. The book of Acts actually couldn't have been written if that wasn't the case, because it gives a story of the life of Paul. And obviously Paul didn't write about the life of Jesus in his letters, and so it makes sense to have people must have been begging for the rest of the story. Tell us about Jesus. And I'm not going to say, hey, deny oral tradition as if it didn't exist. I think there's actually evidence of a great deal of oral tradition in Paul's letters. So, in other words, there's a lot of evidence that Paul was quoting or stating things that were probably also stated by a wider community of believers at the time. So Paul didn't just up and start the gospel or Christianity itself and then it was later utilized, I guess the theory would be, by certain Roman Christians who just wanted to fill in the gaps, maybe some literate ones who knew how to write, and just, so Mark comes along and writes his gospel after Paul's written all of his letters and says, oh yeah, this is all true, and then there's evidence that Mark actually was very pro-Pauline, and whereas Matthew and Luke were more legalistic, more back to the law. They were more on the side of the people from James. So that's entirely possible. They wanted to balance things out and didn't want to lose the Jews, but they really hadn't, I think, sorted out in their minds what the whole controversy hadn't ended with the letters of Paul, let's put it that way. And so around the years 65 through 75 and 80, when the Gospels were written, having assembled a number of other writings that existed prior to that you'll find in common between the Gospels. Long story about how the Gospels were formed in and of themselves, not just put in order in the Scriptures. Do you know that the way that the New Testament is ordered has mostly to do with, number one, the 4 Gospels will come first. And why? Well, because they tell the story of Jesus, and whoever assembled it was the church, people in the church did that. They did it because they thought that giving the life of Jesus was important. And so Matthew's going to come first because it can start with the genealogy, and John's going to come last because it's the most different, and it was probably written last. And so that's how these things got assembled. John lived the longest. But Matthew and Luke were certainly not written by, well, all right. I'm not sure whether about Matthew, if Matthew and Levi are the same, but, and Luke claims to have been a companion of Paul. Maybe it was, but he wasn't an apostle. All right, so the idea that Matthew was an apostle, I'm not going to exclude that from possibility. I haven't heard a deconstructionist argument that says, no, Matthew could not possibly have been one of the apostles. The word Matthew means teacher, and the idea that Levi and Matthew are the same comes from lists of the 12, where you'll see one Matthew, another Levi, but and you kind of figure, well, that must be the same person. So, and the idea that a change of name would happen when a person becomes a Christian. So it's not unusual. Obviously, Saul became Paul, Simon became Peter, Cephas, and Abram became Abraham, right? So these things happen. And Jacob becomes Israel. Where do all these changes happen? Some salvation experience, a change of character, and a change of name go hand in hand. So Matthew or Matthetus or Matthew, it means teacher. So Levi, who maybe had been a tax collector, now has become a teacher. I don't find that to be implausible. It's the historical part of it, where you know that something's been copied from something else, that makes it be dated later, and what things are referring to will do that, and what they don't refer to. So the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is really important for knowing that. Now, I'm digressing. I just thought that I would throw that in on the side so you'd see that, so when were the Gospels written, and is it true? Because when the atheist says, I don't believe this, and they have this huge inventory of information over the internet today, and all they have to do is go #deconstruction, and they're going to find every argument about Christianity that is conceivable from scholars, peer-reviewed works from universities. They're going to say, you're never going to convince me of the gospel. And so let's go back to Pascal's wager. What's the loss if you're wrong? And now, what's the basis of your faith if it's based on fear? I have so many, when I ask Christians, what is your, what do you think salvation is? And they tell me, well, it's salvation from hell. I'm like, really? Now, I have this conversation with my wife pretty frequently, because she believes in hell. She's a very simple Bible-believing Christian, and any argument that sounds different than what she was brought up with is, it's scary to her. She feels like, are you really a Christian if you don't believe this? And so I've questioned whether or not there was a hell for a very long time. And I see the same evidence that she sees. She's seen videos of people saying that they've been there and come back, and how horrible it was. And I know from my own death experience that things can seem very very real. My experience of levitation, when I thought I was levitating, seemed awfully real to me. I don't know. You can think of what you thought. I've been in situations that it's just like, you can't contest that that's a miracle. There's no way that was not a miracle, or this is not a miracle. The very fact of having consciousness in this moment to me is a miracle. I just live in the constant miracle of having consciousness despite all odds. And now I have to go back and explain that. So, I mean, when I say you shouldn't be conscious right now, it's because if you only had one, if you just look at the pure math, if you only have one life to live, it's the coincidence of your life with the point in time now. Any point in your life should land on the same point that happens to be now would be you, is 2 infinity to 1. Unless maybe the assumption that you're making that time just progresses and that maybe brains gradually develop and one of them happens to be the one that would express itself as your consciousness. And you're taking an awful lot for granted in that, because there's so many. I mean, that is an explanation. I'll grant you that. I'm not saying it's utterly impossible. I mean, the limit to infinity is not impossible. It's just so slim in all of possibility that this would happen to be the thing that's happening now. You. This is not a fine-tuning argument that says, all of these conditions had to take place and how improbable that is for you to be alive without an intelligent designer. This is an argument that's saying simply that if you are conscious and have consciousness now, as you, not just a person theoretically, but you yourself, your lifespan's only so long, and an infinite timeline is infinitely long. So the limit to the infinity to 1 is what the odds are that you would be conscious right now, if the only way to have consciousness is if time just marches forward. So that's what I'm talking about. Now, a lot of people don't get that. And so I may have to explain it again. It's they're going to say, there's a retort to this that says probabilities doesn't work that way. It works in for prediction of the future. It doesn't work for figuring out what's going on right now, what's already happened. And so my mind goes back and says, forget what happened. If I have a lottery ticket and I won the lottery, I wouldn't doubt that I had won the lottery. And that's just because, I would be like, really? I'd have to pinch myself. And really, the more the odds were at one point in time set against that thing ever happening, the greater the odds were, the harder I'd have to pinch myself until I get myself out of the matrix and say, hey, chance did not cause that, all right? That was not a simple matter of things just rolling around without some sort of design. Well, so my consciousness existing right now seems to me to be the best argument that against atheism. Although the retort to that is going to be, but you can't conclude that the reason that there's consciousness is God. And I'm okay with that reply. I don't have time today to go into all the counters to all of this and consider all the possibilities there. I'm just describing Pascal's wager right now and sort of tidying up my video from yesterday. And I only have a minute left if I'm going to keep this under 30 minutes to say Pascal's wager had a double wager with my father where he says, well, what if the Protestants are wrong and the Catholics are right, and there's only one way to get to heaven, and that is to become Catholic. So that was, and it was a fire insurance argument, because at that point he wasn't telling me about the glories of heaven. He was just telling me about the fear of hell. Well, I don't think salvation is a